Um, so yeah, hello everyone. My name is Simina Nagul, and I'm a Program and Operations Coordinator here at Iniva. Tonight is our third event as part of the Global Revisions public program, which is a public program selected through open call. Tonight's event is looking, as you all know, at the iconography of the veil in the work of contemporary female Iranian artists, which is a subject that Iniva has worked with, presenting the exhibition Veil in 2003. But it's a real pleasure to be able to revisit that conversation. Tonight we're joined. It's a pleasure to be joined by Katy Shahandeh, academic and art historian, who will present on the symbolism and iconography of the veil, and give some more historical context. And the presentation will be followed by a response from artist Maria Kheirkhah. Then we will have the opportunity to discuss and ask questions. Before we get into the conversations, just a few housekeeping notes. If you can, during the presentation, to avoid any echoes, to keep your microphones on mute. But if you have questions, I encourage you to during the talk, I encourage you to write them in the chat. And at the end, we will try and answer as many questions as possible. So we will start reading them, and then encourage you to, if you'd like to add anything to the question. As you might have noticed, the meeting is being recorded. So if you don't wish to be featured in the video, please turn off your video from stop video. There's a button at the bottom. Tonight's presentations, we will also use the screen share function. But in order to have the full screen, you might need to hide the thumbnail video that's on the side. So there's a setting at the top, just so you can see the whole presentation. At the end, if you have 2 minutes to spare, we will share a link to a survey, just to gather some of the feedback. So yeah, I think I will hand it over to Katy. Yeah, really excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. I can now start sharing my screen, yeah? Let me just see. Sorry about this. We're still trying to... Bear with me, sorry, I'm trying to figure this out a bit myself. Sorry, okay.
5%.
Thanks, okay, we're good. We are good. Let me just also do this. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so for the past 40 years, no symbol has been more evocative of the Iranian woman in the collective imagination of the world than that of the veil, which has for much of the last century taken center stage in the woman question in Iran. Woman, as signified by the veil, falls under the Aristotelian Pythagorean philosophy of opposites, of man versus woman, good versus evil, light versus dark, and the accompanying Weltanschauung. In Shia orthodoxy, the female body has always been a contested site, whereupon the battle for male supremacy and honor has been fought. The veil is a defense erected by the patriarchal state to defend this honor, which is closely tied to a woman's body. The visual arts in Iran depicting women are similarly anchored in the semiotics of the veil, since images, by being displayed, make private scenes public and need the veil in order to enter into these spaces, which presuppose an unfamiliar male gaze. Additionally, the visual iconography of both the Islamic Republic and the West is so entrenched in the semiotics of the veil in their portrayal of Iranian women that it has become a political symbol, a shorthand representing the Iranian woman, and embodying the various paradigms espoused by both the regime and the West in their conception of her. The veil thus comes with a plethora of meanings, both in its originating cultures and outside, becoming both the signifier and the signified, and stands at the crossroads between tradition and modernity, the public and the private, the masculine and the feminine, the East and the West, oppression and liberation. Notwithstanding the social and cultural hermeneutics of the veil and the requirements of the state for its inclusion in artists' representations of women, there are also the demands of an international art market and audience who search for signifiers of Iranianness, such as the veil, which signal otherness. This mode of representation has led some critics to accuse artists using such signifiers of self-exoticism aimed at attracting a Western public, and have termed these works chador art, suggesting that the veil has become the easiest way for artists to promote their work. However, such reductive stereotypes of the veil and the accompanying stereotyping of Muslim and Iranian women also undermine the message and scope of artists who often appropriate the trope of the veil in order to address the situation of Iranian women and issues of gender and society. In today's talk, I will examine the trope of the veil, discussing its importance in the past century in Iran and how different regimes have manipulated it to fit their ideals and to garner support and legitimacy. I will also discuss the various stereotypes surrounding the veil and how its perception has changed and evolved in the last century, both in Iran and the West, and how, since the Iranian Revolution, many women view and use the veil as a political statement and manipulate it in the same way as the Islamic Republic and the Western media do. Having identified these various politics of the veil, I will then look at how contemporary Iranian women artists use representations of the veil in a subversive manner, often mimicking the language of the state and the West in order to question both the situation of women in Iran and Orientalist tropes and Western stereotypes. The veil in Iranian culture has gone through centuries of change, and the semiotics of the veil has evolved to support these different and often contradictory ideologies and applications. Throughout the 20th century in Iran, and largely engendered by the confrontation between tradition and modernity and its accompanying rhetoric, the state has drawn on women as a source of legitimacy. The veil has been crucial in this endeavor, and as a result, in the course of the 20th century and the single lifetime of many Iranian women, they have been veiled, unveiled, and reveiled, mostly forcefully by the state and with serious implications for women's agency. The centrality of women and the veil in Iranian politics can be seen in Mitra Tabrizian's Surveillance, which restages the key moments in Iranian history. At the center of this image stands a veiled woman on a pedestal, at whose feet lies an unveiled, bleeding, and seemingly dead woman. On their left is a young girl in a back chador, and on the right is a veiled and blindfolded bride, showing the different stages of womanhood in the Islamic Republic. Around them stand men representing both the West and secular and religious figures, who are all making deals at the expense of the woman, it seems. Whilst in the back, a crowd of men cheer on. In this image, Tabrizian succinctly summarizes the way the state, the clergy, and the West have all used women, both veiled and unveiled, as central to their policies and to further their own agenda. The woman question was from the beginning closely tied to the semiotics of the veil, which first entered the discourse of the modernists at the beginning of the 20th century during the Qajar rule, when women were primarily confined to the household and had to be heavily veiled if they ventured outside. The first Iranian modernists who traveled to Europe linked the unveiling of women to the progress of the nation and attributed what they perceived as Iran's backwardness to women's condition and their imprisonment in veils. Modernists argued that the veil had prevented women from developing to their fullest potential and that its removal was essential to the advancement of Iran and its dissociation from Arab and Islamic culture. For the traditionalists, however, the unveiled woman became a symbol of corruption, immorality, and westernization. This dialogue between tradition and modernity, along with the restrictions of the Qajar era, which in the eyes of many were repeated after the Islamic Revolution, reinstated the veil and the Sharia laws, made many draw parallels between the Qajar dynasty and the Islamic Republic. Thus, artists such as Shadi Qadirian and Rabeh Bakhshani mix contemporary signifiers with those of the Qajar period to evoke the ongoing tension between tradition and modernity in the Iranian culture. Qadirian won first prize in a competition for a photograph from her Qajar series. However, the Ministry for Guidance and Culture revoked the prize 2 days later, as well as a subsequent photograph from the same series, stating that she portrayed women as limited by the chador, and showing that the regime is itself wary of the semiotics of the veil. In its next chapter in history, the veil once again took center stage when Reza Shah, the founder of the Pahlavi dynasty, issued a formal decree called Kashf Hijab, which ordered women to unveil under the project known as Women's Awakening, that attempted to integrate women into the public spaces of the country. The importance of this date was emphasized by also being designated as Women's Day in Iran, which after the revolution was renamed the Day of Shame, when Ayatollah Khomeini declared that it forced women to either stay at home or become prostitutes. Iran thus became the first Muslim country to ban the veil through legislation, causing great opposition from the clergy and resentment amongst traditional women, many of whom refused to leave their houses, since for them the veil was a symbol of propriety as well as defense against the male gaze. The full force of the law was thrown behind the enforcement of unveiling, and local authorities were ordered to arrest anyone who resisted the new orders, resulting in policemen tearing off women's veils and even beating them. Veiled women were prevented from entering public places, and taxi and bus drivers were liable for fines if they accepted veiled women passengers. High-level officials who appeared in public with veiled wives were dismissed, while low-ranking government employees who did so were fined. With these measures, Reza Shah attempted to reverse the semiotics of the veil by making respectable women unveil, whilst at the same time forcing prostitutes who had previously not been required to veil, thus transforming the veil from a symbol of virtue into a symbol of vice. With unveiling, the class structure accompanying the veil also changed, and whereas veiling was previously a sign of class and leisure, now unveiling became so. The discourse between tradition and modernity continued, with the enforced unveiling being regarded as a liberation of women by the modernists and as a degradation of them by the traditionalists. It also challenged the authority of the patriarchy and represented a critical blow to the power of the clerics, especially over women's sexuality. However, its enforced nature meant that it was not a democratic undertaking and thus not accompanied by personal autonomy. Likewise, since the veil had marked the physical boundary between acceptable and unacceptable gender roles, its elimination also resulted in a crisis of identity for both men and women. Katayoun Karmi's stamp series portrays the contrast between the unveiled Pahlavi woman versus that of the later Islamic Republic. Karmi depicts two officially stamped ID photographs with birthdays at the bottom of each, one showing herself in the compulsory Islamic hijab and very easily recognizable as a Muslim woman, the other of her mother during the Pahlavi regime, immaculately coiffed and in Western attire, with no indication that she is a Muslim or Iranian woman. These images are a poignant reminder of the state-imposed public transformations in appearance undergone by Iranian women in a matter of a few short years, both with unveiling and reveiling, which constitutes the politics of the veil enacted on the battlefield of women's bodies. The veil once again took center stage during the run-up to the revolution, when many women from all classes wore it to show their opposition and unification against the Shah and the Western influence in the country, although this was not a religious stance, but a political and symbolic one. Ayatollah Khomeini made the veil one of the pillars of his ideology and vision for the good and proper Muslim woman, since for him unveiling had caused the ruin of female honor, the destruction of the family, and untold corruption and prostitution. Hence, despite women's participation in the revolutionary process and their opposition to mandatory veiling, by the summer of 1980, Islamic veiling was required in all government and public offices, and by 1983, veiling had become compulsory from all women from the age of 6, including non-Muslims and foreigners. The veil thus became non-negotiable and essential hallmark of the regime and the de facto national costume of Iranian women, with the regime stipulating 74 lashes for violation of the hijab and 10 to 60 days of imprisonment against those who publicly resisted it. The black chador was from the beginning the regime's preferred mode of veiling, but other types of veiling were introduced, all shapeless and in dark colors. In the autobiographical graphic novel Persepolis, Marjane Satrapish illustrates how after the revolution, the dialogue between tradition and modernity shifted to the type of veil women wore, and how women continue to show their political and ideological leanings with these restrictions. Thus, from the beginning, the Islamic Republic fostered a Shia identity, which was epitomized by the veiled woman, who was assigned the new roles as a guardian of religion, state, and society, all of which require the veil as its foundation. Since the patriarchal state is ultimately responsible for maintaining the honor of its women, which forms part of its legitimacy as an Islamic state, the veil became a powerful political symbol central to the ethos of the regime, and the black chador in particular became the most attributed symbol representing the Iranian woman, appearing in most interpretations and visual representations and acting as a signifier for her. Veiled women likewise became the inadvertent public ambassadors of the country, with their images clad in black chadors, recognized globally and broadcast by the Western media, who frequently included such images when reporting on Iran, designating its women as oppressed and subordinated to men. It also became a particularly loaded symbol for women themselves, since for many, the forced reveiling came to represent the loss of the many rights they lost after the revolution, and the new power men attained over their bodies. Hence, the veil encompassed within it both meaning and intent. As a result, after the revolution, many contemporary artists, such as Sonia Balasanian, started to incorporate the veil into their work as a shorthand for Iranian women and their supporters. In the other side, Balasanian has filled a room with figures covered entirely by black chadors, with spotlights shining on them as if in an interrogation room or in a prison courtyard. Since we do not see the faces of the figures, we assume their gender by extrapolation of the chador signifier, which indicates that they are Iranian Muslim women and the sisters of those in the Islamic Republic. They not only cannot see, but cannot be seen, a double negation, which emphasizes the fact that those in the West are also blind to the struggles of these women and can only see the veil and not the women underneath it. The spotlights, meanwhile, shine on the women to highlight their plight, but also on the audience, who are free to roam through the exhibition unveiled, to expose their complicity in this situation. On the wall are a series of blocks, each with a single eye. These replace those of the women's, which are obscured by the veil, and meet the gaze of the spectator in their stead, since good Muslim women are not meant to make eye contact. They can also be interpreted as the eyes that constantly monitor women, such as the morality police, to make sure that they are compliant with the edicts of the state. Arastu Furuhar also uses the veil trope in her science series to highlight the status of women in Iran and their diminished rights. In these pictograms resembling road signs, the figure of the woman is separated from the man by a red line, which represents the boundaries between the sexes which are enforced in the Islamic Republic, such as separate metro carriages and bus sections, as well as rails and curtains in many public spaces. And like the Sharia law of the country, which deems women's lives worth half that of men, the woman occupies half the space of the man and is subservient to him. By thus condensing these inequities into a simple sign, Forohar illustrates how the veil and its accompanying ethos have been institutionalized to become instructions for women's conducts, rights, and behavior. The veil is complicit and indeed instrumental in this division, as it is the prop that allows for women's segregation and oppression. By shrouding her, it dehumanizes her, allowing her to become lesser to the man's more. Hence, it carries within it both meaning and intent. In the exhibition From Far Away, Khaled Niazmand addresses the issues of enforced veiling, polygamy, and the importance of virginity in Muslim marriages, using the veil as shorthand for these injustices. On one side of this installation stands a shrouded figure in a chador, enclosed in a metal cage, which is secured with chain and lock. The phallic-looking symbol reinforcing the fact that these iniquities are instigated by men. To the side of this figure hangs a long black piece of cloth resembling the chador, against which are suspended 4 misshapen metal circles with small padlocks that look like chastity belts, encased in which are oval metal shapes resembling the female vulva. These shapes represent the 4 wives Muslim men are entitled to, and the fact that they have to be sexually available to their husbands and nobody else, indicating how the veil is part of a patriarchal institution that shackles and holds the keys to women's sexuality. In All Men Created Equal, Niazmand again depicts a life-sized veiled figure, which is further wrapped with a red rope that represents bloodied entrails. It stands next to a set of scales containing more rope, which should tilt the scales, but it does not, highlighting the fact that women do not have the same rights here. The legs and feet of the figure are bound and not defined like the freestanding punching figures used in boxing, indicating not only her immobility, but also the fact that she is a sitting target, like the women who are stoned under Sharia law. The figure also brings to mind Lady Justice, who is blindfolded in order to be impartial. Niazmand's figure is likewise blind due to the all-encompassing veil. However, this does not ensure impartiality, since she is not the judge, but the judged, and these judgments are passed by men on women in a system where women are barred from being judges. Thus, the ruling is not impartial, and the scales are unfairly balanced against women. In addition to veiling, the same rules that regulated a woman's physical presence were also applied to her voice, which was seen to be sexually stimulating to men and had to be similarly veiled, resulting in the prohibition of women singing in public or recording songs. In Listen, Nushat Avakolian addresses this issue by showing videos on a loop of women singers who are banned from performing in the Islamic Republic, silently mouthing songs they perform in front of a pretend audience. Tabakolian has also shot dream CD covers for each singer, portraying the same emotionless girl against isolated landscapes, which contrasts with the emotions on the faces of the singers and the warm and intimate backgrounds of their interior setting, demonstrating their estrangement from the public spaces of the country. The text on the covers, inscribed in Farsi, drifts off in places and makes statements such as, "This is not in the Western woman's thought," and "Do you remember that you are not yourself?" further indicating the disenfranchised status of women in the Islamic Republic. The regime was furthermore not content with just veiling women, but was determined to veil them correctly, since women who were badly veiled were suspect in the eyes of the regime and perceived to be eschewing Islamic values. And so similar punishment was meted out for improper veiling as for not being veiled, making bad hijab equal to no hijab in the eyes of the state. This included showing of hair, wearing makeup, tight clothes, or clothes bearing foreign words, signs, or picture. Badly veiled women were labeled as Western dolls or prostitutes and subjected to harassment, with morality police roaming the streets, fining and even beating them for minor violations of the hijab. The state rhetoric regarding the veil was very aggressive towards unveiled women and promulgated unveiling as a plot by the West to weaken Islam by corrupting and exploiting its women, and included slogans such as "Death to the Unveiled Woman." Unveiled and poorly veiled women were and continue to be depicted as inferior and likened to sweets without wrappers that attract flies, whilst properly veiled women are like well-performing appliances, well-looked after cars, and pearls that go to heaven. However, despite the harassment, fines, and punishment, women, particularly the younger generation, see bad veiling as a way of fighting the state's prescriptions and constantly defy the morality police by wearing makeup, flouting the Islamic dress code, and turning public spaces and their own bodies into ideological battlegrounds. Shirin Ali Abadi's Uptown Girls in the Miss Hybrid and City Girls series are the epitome of this subversive attitude. These girls do not wear the traditional veil, but instead adapt it to Western standards, showing a lot of hair, and eradicate their Eastern features by having plastic surgery, wearing blue and green contact lenses, and bleaching their hair blonde. Their provocative poses draw attention to themselves as sexual objects and are diametrically opposed to how a good veiled Muslim girl should act and look like. Ali Abadi thus makes a tongue-in-cheek reference to the state's fears of badly veiled and Westoxicated women who, ironically, they have created through their prescriptions. In Flashing, Paris Furuhar likewise shows a subversive attitude to veiling, depicting a black chador-clad woman exposing herself in front of an H&M storefront featuring posters of a male model. This is particularly problematic since not only does a woman expose herself voluntarily, but she does so to a Western male gaze, whilst at the same time evading the gaze of the spectator as well as that of the Islamic State. The male model, however, cannot escape the gaze of either the woman or us, the viewers, showing that the veil is the other side of the coin to the exposure of models from the Western tradition. Furuhar shows that the veil does not take away the woman's autonomy, nor does it guarantee piety and chastity. In Chelgi's, Mandana Muqaddam addresses the paradoxical implications of the veil vis-a-vis the hair it is supposed to conceal. Here, Muqaddam completely veils what looks like a female figure with hair instead of cloth and places her under plexiglass, adding an extra layer of protection both for and from her, thus addressing the role of hair, which is deemed harmful. This harm was highlighted by Prime Minister Bani Sadr, who stated on national TV that women's hair emanates harmful rays, which is damaging to men and should be neutralized by wearing the veil. Chelgis, literally meaning 40 braids, is the name of the heroine from an Iranian fairy tale about a beautiful long-haired woman who was cursed and imprisoned so that whoever saw her would be turned into stone. By evoking this tale, Muqaddam draws parallels with the way women in Iran are forcibly veiled in order to ostensibly protect others from harm. By thus veiling the woman with hair which both covers her and at the same time exposes her forbidden hair, Muqaddam questions the efficacy of veiling as well as addressing the role of long hair as a symbol of beauty and femininity in most cultures, portraying that these designations are equally onerous for women. After the revolution, the state's rhetoric and imagery propagated the ideal Islamic woman not only as veiled, but as primarily mothers and housewives, and relegated them to the house and domesticity, an ideology which is ingrained in children from an early age, with primary school textbooks portraying veiled women engaging in traditional domestic chores. The regime also tried to further force women into unpaid domestic labor by limiting their job opportunities, asking employers to give preferences to men and women to give up their jobs so men could take them. The veil thus symbolized and sanctioned the woman's bond to the house. Shadi Qadirian addresses this issue in her Like Everyday series, where she depicts a veiled figure upon whose face she has superimposed various household items. Qadirian uses these symbolic attributes of the housewife alongside the veil signifier to demonstrate ironically that they subsume the woman, who no longer recognizable become objects themselves, automatons to wield these other objects, giving new meaning to the phrase objectifying women. In these images, the household items also act as secondary veils, not only completely subsuming the woman and eradicating any individual features, but also allowing her to avert the gaze of the spectator. These images are thus a social commentary on the situation of women who are bound to the house and domestic labor, although despite the veil signifier, the issues Kheirkhah raises are universal ones. Since the veil designates the feminine, it is as a result deemed degrading for men to wear it, since it reduces them to the level of women and would entail losing their privileged masculine position. Arastu Furuhar's blind spot, portraying a man wearing a black chador back to front, plays on these assumptions and presents an uneasy contradiction, since we do not expect either for it to be worn the wrong way around, nor for man to be wearing it. This could allude to the fact that women in Islam have to walk behind men and so are staring at the back of their heads, or it can also suggest that in such societies, women's identities are obliterated by men and that the veil is a backwards tradition implemented by men. Furuhar thus offers multiple layers for interpretation and multiple blind spots. Not surprisingly, the Iranian Cultural Ministry refused to allow her to exhibit these images. So in protest, Furuhar exhibited the empty frames on the wall anyway. With the Iran-Iraq war, the veil entered another level of semantics, with the regime drawing heavily on the imagery of veiled militant women, which were plastered all over the country. These images intimated women's dual obligation towards both veiling correctly and being a pious mother, daughter, and wife who called upon her men to go to war. Thus, during this period, there is a noticeable semantic fusion of hijab and jihad, which is holy war. And women's duty to veil correctly stood hand in hand with men's duty to become martyrs. In the Women of Allah series, Shirin Neshat adopts this semantic fusion by combining the trope of the veil with the semiotics of war and martyrdom, using symbols such as tulips, which are representative of martyrs and depicted on the Iranian flag, guns, and mothers of martyrs. Additionally, Neshat subverts these symbols by casting herself, a woman who was not in Iran during the revolution and war, in this revolutionary role. Like the women portrayed by the regime, Neshat is not actually engaged in battle, but uses the performative aspects of the veil and guns as props in an ideological performance, emphasizing the role that women played in the revolution and war, as well as defying Orientalist tropes of submissive Muslim women. Likewise, the calligraphy covering the images, forming a secondary veil, is appropriated by Neshat, who instead of traditional Islamic text, uses the poetry of feminist writers such as Furukh Farrokhzad to further empower her women of Allah. The inclusion of these feminist writers is significant because they were the first Iranian women who unveiled their voices, and Neshat is following in their tradition of a subversive feminist narrative, transferring this dialogue from a literary medium to a visual one. The Western world was first introduced to the veil through an Orientalist construct which portrayed it as the costume of the exotic other, evocative of Shahrazad from 1001 Nights or Salome and her dance of the seven veils. In recent history, it has been loaded with preconceptions of a terrorist Islamic identity or that of an oppressed and backward woman. Contemporary Iranian artists have been using the veil as a signifier for the Iranian woman to portray both the similarities and the differences between Iran and the West, whilst at the same time showing their shortcomings and rejecting the stereotypes and ideologies of both. In this manner, Haleh Anbari's traveling photographic installation Chador Dadar juxtaposes the chador with non-Iranian signifiers from around the world, Dadar being a slang word for going away on a trip. In Paris, the women pose in their colorful chadors against an advertisement for the Orientalist painter Ingres exhibition showcasing the painting of La Grande Odalisque, which is one of the most famous Orientalist paintings, and elsewhere next to a poster for Elle magazine's special body and diet edition. Contrary to the women whose faces we cannot see, and the Elle model are both nude and exposed to the viewer. Anbari thus questions Orientalist tropes regarding Eastern women, as well as the subjugation of women to the male gaze in the Western media and art historical tradition, showing that veiling is the other side of the coin to Orientalist fantasies and images of unclad or semi-clad women catering to a male gaze, which are no less exploitative of women than veiling. This is particularly cogent in the case of France, where many female students were suspended or expelled from middle and high school for wearing the scarf in class, showing that coercive measures regarding the veiling practices are not just limited to Islam and the East, and that in the West, women's choice to veil in this space is also disrespected. Azal is another artist who uses the veil trope to convey both the disparity and similarity of Iranian women and their Western counterparts. In her Me series, she films herself in short home movie style videos performing various tasks such as weightlifting or going into the sea wearing a black chador in Iran, where the beaches are segregated and women can only swim veiled. These actions are then explicated with subtitles in English, French, or both, drawing on Western references and iconography such as feminism, Valentine's Day, or Botticelli's Venus, which are relatable for a Western audience, in contrast to the chador-clad woman who is not. By providing the subtitles, Ghazal gives the women a voice and makes her approachable to a Western audience, whilst also highlighting the difficulty of translating the East into the West and vice versa, since the veiled woman is the antithesis of a Western viewer's idea of feminism or Botticelli's Venus. By the performance of such mundane and ordinary tasks and showing the woman's universal aspiration, such as wanting to be beautiful, independent, and loved, Ghazal is humorously showing that the chador-clad Muslim woman is not very different from her Western counterpart, despite her outward appearance. In so doing, she parodies not only a culture which forces women to perform such tasks encumbered by the veil, but also the culture that would judge her for a piece of cloth, thus showing sameness to be the other side of difference and both to be equally myopic. Ghazal's character is a hero of her own story and resists the stereotype of the passive and oppressed Muslim woman and, despite her veil, engages in all the activities that a Western woman would. Another strategy employed by artists in the veiling of Western is the veiling of Western signifiers and icons, a reverse strategy to Orientalism. In Liz Undercover, Afshan Ketabchi reappropriates Andy Warhol's image of the actress Elizabeth Taylor by veiling her with a chador. Thus, the Eastern artist manipulates the Western artist's image of a Western icon, and by the use of the chador, which is the Iranian signifier par excellence, claims it as her own and reverses the Orientalist matrix onto itself. Interestingly, Elizabeth Taylor had posed in several photographs wearing the chador when she had traveled to Iran before the revolution, although at the time it was not compulsory to wear it, and Taylor is dressing up in these photos. Ketabchi's reappropriation therefore comes as a full circle in the appropriation of the trope of the veil by the West and East, respectively. In a similar vein, Shirin Aliabadi, in collaboration with her husband Farhad Moshiri, appropriates the Western iconic doll Barbie, which, like the veil, comes with a lot of cultural baggage, to become a hijab Barbie, a good and properly veiled Muslim woman and doll. This is particularly ironic since the Iranian regime has touted Barbie as un-Islamic and banned its sale, and by veiling Barbie, the artists are showing the absurdity of a regime that needs to veil even dolls and store mannequins in order to legitimize itself as an Islamic state. Thus, this veiling, however, is not any more problematic than the West's expectations of Barbie, which gives her unrealistic proportions and features, and then passes these impossible aspirations on to young girls. Hence, hijab Barbie shows the pressures and signifiers placed on women both by the East and West are unrealistic, and the veil is just one such signifier, same as the Barbie doll herself. By thus manipulating Western icons to become ideal Muslim women, artists such as Ali Abadi and Ketabchi inverse the acculturation process embraced by many young Iranians who adopt Western dress and physical appearance in order to achieve unrealistic Western standards of beauty. Given that the veil is a sine qua non for the Islamic Republic in its conception of womanhood and an important symbol for both the regime and the West in the rhetoric and imagery of Iranian women, who have been increasingly stereotyped by both, it has subsequently become a particularly loaded symbol for women themselves. The iconography of the veil has played a dominant role in the visual arts of post-revolutionary Iran, both in the case of state-sponsored art as well as that of independent contemporary artists in Iran and the diaspora, who often use it as a shorthand for the Iranian woman. The use of the veil in Western reductive interpretation and predetermined vocabulary signifying repressed Muslim Iranian women have also undermined the message and scope of these artists' work, which can be interpreted as othering and self-exoticism. However, as we have seen, these artists are in fact often adopting mimicry as a visual tactic and using pre-existing codes associated with the veil subversively in order to unveil and expose underlying gender and social issues, thus loading their images with hidden and contradictory meaning which challenge not only the ideology of the regime, but also gender constructs and Western and Orientalist preconceptions, allowing them to criticize one without reinforcing the other. Likewise, many translate these works as a critique of the veil and Muslim women. However, this is also too simplistic a reading of these images, which allow multiple viewpoints and multiple readings. In today's Iran, these stereotypes do not hold validity, and the majority of veiled women are vociferous, visible, and present despite their veils, a fact that is affirmed and reiterated by Iranian artists' portrayal of them. Despite such reductive interpretation, the iconography of the veil is central to the strategies of subversion employed by artists in their construction of alternative narratives, allowing them to shine a spotlight on the stereotypes of the veil and, by extension, Iranian women, and showing that the veil, like the women whom it covers, is polysemous and equivocal. In doing so, they extend and expand the trope of the veil using its performative aspects along with metaphor and allegory to challenge previous stereotypes and suggest a multitude of frequently opposing interpretations and narratives. Iranian women artists continue to push the envelope in their endeavors to reject previously prescribed identities and accounts, offering alternative narratives of alterity and dissent, and a fundamentally feminist ontological rendition which deconstructs conventional interpretation and known epistemological structures, making us question the veracity of these historical values and portrayals, and offer in their stead a new understanding and narrative of the women beneath the veil. So, thank you. That is it. Back to you, Simina.
Thank you, Katy, for that. And now we will hand over to Maria. Maria, I think you might need to unmute your microphone because we've had a few.
I was hoping that somebody would unmute their their mic because it was going all the way through. Yeah, well,
I mean, you wanted someone to mute it, yeah?
Well, so yeah. I kind of
yeah, I know. It was.
Well, Kate, thank you very much. That was really very enlightening presentation. As well, I mean, there are at least 3 different ways I can respond to that. In one way, I can as an artist or as a curator, or through my research, which I'm hopefully going to be wrapping up soon. I think I will approach it as an artist first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to read out a personal statement, and I'm going to really discuss myself as an artist in the diaspora and how I feel about my context, because what you've just described is, for me, is a situation about women in Iran, which I kind of observed early on in the revolution, rather than what I've been seeing in the past 10, 15 years. It's changed tremendously. And I think as the revolution has matured, so has some of the issues to do with Iranian women, the veiling. However, in order to bring it into a global kind of space of discussion, the veil doesn't the veil. I have a huge problem in kind of pronouncing it. So my apologies to everyone who's listening. I just mean the veil. So I think that actually it spans to what is called so-called the Middle Eastern region. So is a regional thing rather than, I would say, a national thing. So I think what is happening, from what I understand, when artists, Iranian artists, women artists, are discussing these issues, they are relating obviously to their own context, to Iran and what is happening. So there are a few problems. I mean, I actually find that problematic because, first of all, I find it problematic that we are discussing Iranian women, and I'm not sure we can speak on behalf of all Iranian women, because, to be honest, we can only speak from the point of view of the artists. The number of artists that you've spoken about, we can only, and often I would say most artists, including myself, come from very privileged background, privileged positions, if not background, definitely from privileged position, where we do have a voice and we are in a different context where we can speak. And if my research says anything, when I studied all the women artists that you've been discussing and their work, quite a lot of them have access, or either live there in the diaspora or have access to go back and forth to Iran. So Mitra Tabrizian, who's here, Hengame Golestan. You haven't shown any of the work of Hengame Golestan, whose work I absolutely love.
Yes.
And she's the mother of photography. There are a few things I've observed. One, that you're showing a lot of photographic works. And I think that's kind of interesting because Iranian artists don't always express themselves through the veil at all. I mean, in fact, when I looked at Mitra Tabrizian's work, or Hengame Golestan, so these are photographic artists, but if you think about Haleh Niyazman, she's got the Reorient series, which is fantastic, 2003 to 2005. Sonia Balasanian, who does Silences of the Stones in 2015. Again, not expressed through the veil. Parastu Furuhar, whose I actually looked at her work, and she's got a lot of work with calligraphy.
Very much.
She extends the calligraphy from the wall into the space, and it's absolutely brilliant. And I think there's a lot to be discussed and said. So I think what we're missing here is not necessarily the Iranian artists working through the veil as a central thing, but it is really to do with platforms which kind of invites artists, or only Iranian artists, who do use the veil in their work. So I think these are all kind of issues that we need to kind of pull together and look at it. I don't think there's enough discussions happening between Iranian women. For example, women in England and Europe are very disparate. We're not in contact. So I think when Iniva kind of invited me to be a respondent, I was really more excited about talking to another Iranian woman about the aesthetics. So as far as my research goes, I'm actually looking at the aesthetic and ethics of using particular visual language. And that includes the veil as a symbol. And I think it's really important for women artists to really kind of take that on board when they show their work from one context and they take it into another context. Now, for example, I've got a few notes in here, and I wasn't sure how I'm going to respond to you. when we look at the context of women and the veil and how it's used within a Western context, and it's pretty loaded, right? It's pretty loaded as a symbol. Now, I was kind of thinking about Shilina John Muhammad wrote in the Telegraph about in 2014, and the title of her essay or her paper is Muslim Women's Bodies, the Hottest Property in 2014. So she writes that in 2014, and this is what she says: when it comes to Muslim women, it's still all about what we wear, and the last 12 months only serves to confirm this sad state of affairs. What we say, our achievements, opinions, and self-determination continue to be brushed aside. Even as women's movements around the world continue to gather momentum, Muslim women's looks, clothing, and bodies continue to ever forcefully to be policed. We continue to be reduced to one-dimensional, voiceless images. So this is an Asian woman discussing it, right? So what it actually kind of begins to open up is that this is an issue which is pretty global and is pretty much, we are dealing with the context of people who've been exposed to Orientalist ideas and Orientalist aesthetics and symbols. We are dealing with a context which has been exposed to colonialism and colonialist photography, and women are central, nudity is central within that. So I think it's really important to take that on board when we start as artists. When we use these symbols, we've got to also kind of think about it as an important, in a way, we're actually looking at who are we talking to? Are we talking to a Western audience? Are they the only ones that we can relate to? Aren't there, you know, all these other women from other countries? Shouldn't we then be relating to also to them? And so my point is that as an artist, at least in the past 10 years, I've been really rethinking how I might not use the veil in my work. I've been really trying very hard not to associate myself with the veil, not because I'm against it. I wear it during ritualistic times and I absolutely love it. I enjoy it, I feel comfortable with it. I also feel comfortable without wearing it. So I don't wear it so my normal self is what you see, but at times of ritual, I wear it. At times of kind of where you go to kind of a religious kind of ceremony, when you go to Iran, I wear it and I'm completely happy in that garment. So there are issues there, and I think another issue that we could expand upon is the question of the privilege of the capital city women and the regional women. So for example, what I didn't see in your presentation was women who practice the veiling really for real, and they are reflecting on it. So if I think about Fanon's kind of reading of the psychology of the veil, what the veil meant to Algerian women, which kind of discusses a lot of kind of colonial photography, and Malek Alula kind of explores that with the naked photographic works of Algerian women with the show of their breasts, you know, variety of it. And she says, and this is what she says about the Algerian woman and how she feels without the veil. Okay. Since you're contesting the veil, I'm bringing in another point of view. I'm turning it on its head, what it might mean to the woman who's not who practices, and what it meant within a colonial context.
I'm actually not contesting, sorry to interrupt you, I'm actually not contesting the veil at all. And I don't think that the artists are contesting the veil. Because as I was sort of like saying in the beginning, is it's not the veil, it's what it represents, with not only with forced veiling, but with the forced unveiling as well. So it's the lack of autonomy that is, I think, what a lot of artists, and what I have a problem with is not at all, I'm not at all contesting the veil. And really none of the artists who I've spoken to who are shown here are doing that either.
Okay.
None of them have a problem with the veil as such. But anyway, sorry.
The unveiling happened a long time ago, right? So we're talking something at Reza Shah's time. But
Reza
these
Shah.
artists are very contemporary, and they're talking post-revolution.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So this is why I've got this image of the artist, so that they're actually relating their veil with the political condition and their status. So in that sense, I would place it in a very particular moment. And I think for people who are actually really looking at that, looking at the work, take for example Shadi Qadirian's work. And I love some of her Qajar period's work, but I actually, if I think about, and I'm going to share this with you, this particular piece of work that she did, and it was, okay, let me share my screen with you guys. Are you seeing that? No? Okay, can you see that?
Yeah, that's like everyday series.
Okay, it is. I think when I saw this piece of work and I saw the size of it at the Saatchi Gallery, it kind of really, I found it quite upsetting. Why have I found it upsetting? Because it begins to draw parallels. So what we're seeing in front of us is the veil, you know, obviously the chador, and then you see the utensils. So it draws a very, very direct parallel between the division of labor, which is in Iran, women and men, you know, and women, and it reduces the place of the woman. I don't actually know whether it's to do with me coming from north of Iran, where women are pretty strong, pretty bolshy, they've got their own voice, and they're very strong. And I think most Iranian women that I come across are incredibly strong. So that piece of work is drawing almost a parallel of another woman, a passive woman who is just tied to her to her kind of chore, everyday chore, right? So, and I think that I found that really quite depressing to see and it was given a massive space. The portraits were well blown out of much bigger than the life size, and so to me there is a huge problem there, and this is why this was one of the reasons why I haven't wanted to really use that signifier.
Do you know the story behind this series, the Like Everyday series? Do you know the story of how she came about to make this series?
No, I don't know how, but what I see as an artist when I walk into that space, what every person who actually walks into that space has not got access to Qadirian's background, how she's come to do that. It is what you see right in front of you. And the visual signification is both in size and is in its subject matter is quite significant. And that's what I read. As a visual artist, I read that. I go in and I look at that, and immediately it's a very kind of simple messaging in a way. So that's what I read. However, I think not only, to be honest, when I kind of started off as an artist in I'm going to show you this. the veil actually touches many of us, you know, and many of us have actually engaged with it. You know, you can't be just a woman artist and not deal with that. So in 1998, and that's where I met Zainab Sidira herself. You know, we were on the same course and we were discussing that, of course. And at the same time, but let's just look at the next slide. Can you see this? So 10 years later, I started seeing that image, which is almost kind of close to the image that I constructed, and I go into it, kind of, I super analyze it in any case. So I've had that right next to West Dulwich Station, a very white, affluent area, and they're just looking at that piece, this visual image poster. So what I'm saying is that basically that these images are getting interpreted in a very particular way, because we are within a context where we're looking at colonial photography, we're looking at people who've got a huge assumption and presumptions. So I think when we come to use these signifiers, it is only right for us to look at it, look at the context that is in, and take responsibility for it. So it is partly our responsibility. And I've had a couple of friends from Iran, a few friends who are artists and have been working in this area, and they've been saying, like Shahandeh Salehipour, who works with miniature painting, and she says for her what is important is working as a painter. She's not really interested in the, you know, so there are plenty of artists who actually don't work with the veil. And as a matter of fact, me too. So there's like Minu Asadi. There's also Sohaila Sokhanvari, whom I think you're familiar with.
Here today, I think. Sohaila's here today. And I write about Sohaila in my thesis, but this particular talk was about the veil. Yeah.
And then there is Mariam Hashemi, who's around, who works, whose creativity, she's very playful with it, so she never stops in one place to really explore it. So these are just some of the artists, and I was just thinking about the amount of exhibitions that we've had in the past 3 decades has always given platform to women who have used the veil. And I think as an artist, I'm really quite fed up with it. I'm not fed up with the artist, because the artist makes what they do what they do. Shirin Eshad does what she does. But I'm tired of seeing that over and over again, and not seeing enough of the other works of these artists. You know, these artists make lots of other work. Why aren't we seeing that? Why are we continuously seeing this symbol?
Oh, no, I think we do see it. It's just that, like, this particular talk was about the veil and what it represents, and basically to try to get rid of some of the myths that surround it. But of course, the Iranian artists and the women artists are extremely prolific, and I write about them in all the various different contexts, and absolutely not just on the veil. So this was just for the purposes of today.
Okay, but all I'm saying is that that's probably why people are kind of when you talk about, oh, that's chador. I've never heard that actually before.
Chador art.
Chador art.
Chador art, yeah.
It is then really quite understandable within that context, if you see what I mean. So this is what I'm trying to say, is that there must be so much of it that is become a cliche.
I think there's much less now. I think definitely in the beginning there was a lot, but now there is definitely a lot less. For artists who are showing in Iran, you can't, obviously you don't have the same way of depicting women that you can have here. They cannot show nudity, they cannot, even as you know, in movies and on TV, everything is censored. So if they want to exhibit, and that's actually what Shahdeh Qadirian has said, is that they need to show, they need to have the veil. They cannot exhibit otherwise images of women. So there is that in for the artists who are Iran, they don't have the license that artists here, you know, in the diaspora have. And they have tried to, I think, use that, and they have used it and manipulated it to mean something very different to, I think, what we see in the West, what the regime tries to basically foist upon women. So
yeah, I mean, yeah. Well, I think what you had, there were loads of images with a lot of political problems. So it was actually a very loaded, politically loaded, from a very particular perspective, presentation. So, and I just wanted to throw some up. Can you see my screen?
yes.
I was just going to throw some images for us to really consider, and this is my response to all the veil that you kind of images that you've shown. And this is portraits of Colonel Kheirkhah, and walking it, you know, that's where women are taking it, younger women who are wearing and they're being really quite, in a way. So I'm just kind of throwing that as a visual response to what
no, absolutely. No, I think that the artists also feel that, which is why, for example, Khala Anbari's Chador Dadar, she shows that, you know, that a lot of them are showing that the veil is not the problem, it's the perception of the veil that is the problem.
Right. So
which I think,
okay, that's interesting. So they are actually, they're talking to a Western audience.
Not all of them are. No. I think, like Shahdeh Qadirian always says, it's her audience is Iranians. She does. I think that's why it's not. And it's interesting, the Like Every Day that you said disturbed you here. A lot of feminist NGOs, they use her posters. That Like Everyday poster, they use that as in their offices. Because they see it as a very feminist, image. So I think it's also the interpretation, and that's at the end of the day art and how you perceive it. And like for me, I see it as a very feminist image because it attacks. And to give you a bit of background, because I said about the Like Every Day, Shahdeh Qadirian's art is very personal. She draws on her own life and on her own experience. And Like Every Day came about because she got married and she received all this as wedding presents. She received all these household items as wedding presents, and she realized that, oh, now I have to, that this is being, but that is not just Iranian women. I think that is very much in the West as well. Women are still supposed to be caregivers to the kids. It is still very much the expectation for women.
Yes, but I think her work is very specific with the chador. I need two elements in the work, and I think that's something really quite important to take up. I understand her kind of her private feelings towards it, but I guess this is not the only one, so I'm not going to pick on just Qadirian, but so these are kind of, as far as I'm concerned, these are the kind of issues that I like to air, and the images that I was going to kind of present, and I'm kind of curious as to what your audience thinks and what the questions that will come up. So as far as I'm concerned, that's my response to the work that I've seen. And yeah, thank you very much, Katy. So I think I'll open it to to the audience to make comments or questions. Semina, is that okay? Are we open
Yep,
to
yep,
questions?
absolutely.
Thank you.
So we have a question from Hassan Vada. To what extent do you feel, or Hassan, would you prefer to ask the question yourself? It's to what extent do you feel the various points of reference in your when your talk is either muted, reduced, or platformed within the contemporary art scene and curatorial cultures, which are so locked into a secular and arguably anti-religion sentiment?
Sorry,
Katie.
Sorry, it dropped out. So it's saying, sorry, I'm just reading. What extent you feel the various points of reference in your talk is either muted, reduced, or platformed within the contemporary art scene?
Can you read it properly?
Sorry, I was just reading it in the. So he asks, to what extent do you feel that various points of reference in your talk is either muted, reduced, or platformed within the contemporary art scene and curatorial cultures, which are so locked into a secular and arguably anti-religion sentiment? So I'm not sure I'm understanding the question correctly, but I think what you're trying to, actually, is it possible to ask, to sort of like explain a little bit, if you unmute yourself, Hassan?
Yeah, hold on. Yeah,
Yes, yes, I can.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, thanks for this conversation. It kind of, I suppose, is following on from the discussion that was just being had. But I think in terms of, because like all the artists that you are selecting and things are ones which end up becoming manifest in like collections and things like this, and those collections, those museums, those public spaces, particularly within the ones that have quite a lot of influence in terms of acquisitions around the world, they have a very specific culture in terms of what they how they perceive religion and certain conversations around religion, and they are very much confidently secular, even though they don't explicitly say so. So I suppose within that framework, I was wondering how much of this um, debate discussion around the veil is reduced when it comes to exhibition, when it comes to collecting, when it comes to acquisitions, because within these institutions, within this curatorial culture, there is quite a it's quite a secular space, and arguably many would also say it's quite anti-religious.
Yes, and I think there are a few that have been bought by museums, and I think some of them have been with sort of donations from the Iranian community. Some of these images that were bought, they're not really on show that much. I think still this sort of art, I mean, there is sort of some token pieces everywhere, but I think that it is an uncomfortable art when actually, if it's sort of understood correctly, if it's the message behind it is understood. And I think that still in the West, they're not really ready for this sort of dialogue. It's still, in my opinion, still sort of stuck in a colonial rhetoric and curatorial practices as well, particularly in the sort of in the bigger institutions. I don't know if that sort of answered it or not, your question.
Yeah, I think it's a question that just starts. It's just adds to the conversation. But it's just that idea of like, I don't know, like it's like this. It's like this really leaning into or confidence within this art or art world or art space being like secular or being space which is devoid of religion, and it just there's something really interesting. I think how that contributes, particularly around questions around the veil and things like this, or any Islamic hate topics that enter the art world. I think it's also like because a lot of these conversations that happen within the curatorial sector, they lean in all these different fields, as in philosophy, politics, cultures, but they always leave out theology and almost look at Islam theologically as this pre-modern entity which didn't have a modernism yet. I mean, Islamic fiqh is always it's always responded to modernity, and it doesn't really, yeah. So there's just some questions, some statements to add to the conversation.
So are you saying that the complexity of artistic work is not explored enough, and the curatorial works or curatorial practices or the markets or museums who collect work are more interested in simplified iconic work rather than the complexity of where it comes from?
Yeah, I think you're missing out quite a significant part of that complexity by not having perhaps by not bringing looking or incorporating theological perspectives in when it's always located as political or cultural. But yeah, that I think then that comes to what Katy was saying around curatorial practice perhaps still being quite locked into colonial legacies or even like Orientalist lineage.
And also, not a lot of these, not a lot of the curators are Muslims either. So I think that they come from, you know, to a large extent, perhaps you curate what you know and what is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, just that idea even of like who is Muslim is also quite interesting. It's like there's this thing that comes up quite in the specific conversations I've had around this. Is one of the things come up is like this culturally Muslim thing of like these works are exploring Islam in a culturally relevant sense or a politically relevant sense because the theology doesn't connect with modernity, but that link is there, but for some reason within the art space it isn't. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Any other question?
We have quite a few questions, so I will take the slightly longer ones. There's a question from Mariam Sarafan. Whilst there is a self-orientalization to an extent in some Iranian women's art, the predominant problem which is being focused on is the fact that men are imposing veiling as well as unveiling. It just so happens that we are currently living in the period of veiling. If we were living in the period of unveiling, the criticism of regime would still be applicable. Would I be correct with this sentiment?
I would say so, yes, because as I was saying, I don't think it is the actual veiling or unveiling. It's sort of having allowing women's agency and the freedom to choose whether to veil or not to veil. So it's for me, and I think it is about that. It's about freedom of choice rather than sort of that veiling is bad or unveiling is bad. It is a matter of freedom of choice, exactly. So it's not, it is the fact that it is enforced.
Well, okay, any more questions coming up?
Yeah, we have another one from Raksha Patel.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that the art market reinforces what Middle Eastern artists make? So because the veil and an exoticized image of non-Western woman is what Western audiences want to see, this is what is given credence, so artists stay making works about the same boring thing, as this is what sells and gets exhibited. Maria, I think your perspectives are broader and more challenging, really interesting to hear and think about.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay.
You want to respond or should I?
I think you should respond. I think is your gig, so yes, please.
No. I do think that to some extent they do reinforce the market. They do produce art to to basically sell. And at the end of the day, artists are also, you know, they also have to make a living and they have to sell their art. And but a lot of the art that we are talking about were not really meant for a Western public. Some of the art that we talk about, it happened that they basically got sort of like, some people bought it here, but not all of them were marketed for a Western public. But to a large extent, it is true. They do want this, and this is what I basically said, is that they do look for signifiers of Iranianness and being Middle Eastern, and the veil is the biggest signifier of that. So it is to a large extent that as well.
So it is actually a fight for platform as well. Is a platform that kind of looks at these kind of very narrow margins of work. And artists are always looking for platform. So in a way I understand, but I think it has to be a dialogue between, it has to be the responsibility of curators, who I often find quite lazy in that they can go out and look to see what more there is. They just pick up on the easiest symbols that is understood. And I think artists really, it is also the artist's responsibility to think about, oh, I'm meant to make it for my Iranian. I cannot see how the work of many of artists you've shown actually goes around Iran to be shown, and what would our audiences over there think? And also, we do have a different context. In Iran there is a different context. People who are practicing the veil, there's nothing extraordinary or exotic about it. Exactly. It is just a way of life. Is just another thing. And I think Iranian film directors, women film directors, have been one of the most successful in being able to discuss very serious, very interesting issues in their films. They're able to use that image, but not sensationalize the whale. And I think what I find in these images is a sensationalized image that almost can sell quite quickly, if you like, sell visually, there is a snappy. And so what I'm actually showing all these kind of other slides is that this is the kind of, we are image junkies. And so with photography, with color, with lots of photographs, with things that actually sensationalizes something, it becomes easier for curators to curate work, because they're not actually looking at more complex ideas that are coming from that side, whether they want to actually discuss other aspects of maybe whether it's religion or whether visual as well. So I think there's a lot to be explored, and I think I can understand what you're describing is a very specific lecture and very specific talk. But I think for artists, as an artist, I'm quite frustrated by seeing that site over and over again, and the simple signification of that. I am definitely looking to decenter these kinds of images, these kinds of symbols.
These are quite old, a lot of them, though. They were, a lot of them, like the exhibitions and all that, they were from the end of the 90s, Shirin Neshat's was end of the 90s. So these are a lot of them older images. They're not sort of new, and a lot of the artists have moved on. Even Shirin Neshat, she's doing like a lot of other things. It's not the veil. You see, people like Ghazaleh Hedayat, she has gone sort of like, a lot of them are moving towards like more abstraction. They don't want to show the veil because of the criticism they have received. So a lot of people are moving away from the veil and moving into sort of more to the extent that they can, you know. I mean, even Shahandeh Iranian, her series Nil Nil and White Square, it was just sort of like still lifes. There was no nobody in the frame. So there is this was very specifically about the history of veiling and about how artists, and this was mostly at the beginning of the revolution. It was not something that was addressed, obviously, when unveiling happened. This was not addressed during the Kashf Hijab, because there was no sort of like artist at the time who would do that.
Yeah, I think when you talk about Kashf Hijab, you're talking about a very particular. I think we can't move from one period of time to another period of time. I think when you discuss photography and iconography post-revolution, it really becomes about the Iranian Revolution, and it does become about it is also connected to religion. It is also connected to ideology. It is so we can't actually leave those very important issues out. Now, as a researcher, I can completely understand why your research needs to exist, because then we can actually, as a matter of fact, if I had a choice, I would have loved to have had your research before my research, because then I could have actually picked up on it and said, but look, you know, I continuously try and talk to people I work with is look, that's what's happening, that's what's been going on, but there isn't enough information, there's not enough research. So I think it's really important that these kinds of conversation, these kinds of research exists, so that other younger generation of artists can actually pick up on it and really bounce away from it and discuss the new issues. So as far as your as far as I'm concerned, with the presentation you gave is interesting, and it really needs to exist, and I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. But I think there's a lot more conversations we need to have.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Oh, yes, and this is not my research is basically on contemporary women artists, Iranian women artists. So it's not on the veil. Just to clarify, this is just one sort of signifier that falls into sort of like a lot of work that they do, and a lot of very, very interesting art. And the veil is not actually the biggest and the most interesting of it, but it was just one aspect.
I mean, there are people like, I mean, this kind of work also had a huge amount of criticism in terms of identity politics, that now we have a political other, you know, that we are witnessing, and is being expressed through this identity politics, which in a way is kind of quite narrow, is quite limited in its scope, and I think so I think that we need to actually break away from that in order to break that kind of narrow spectrum of perception. And let's face it, before Islamophobia there was Iranophobia. So
there's still there, I think, Iranophobia.
So I think there is a relationship there. There is a relationship in politically, and as I remember it, when different shows come, they come at very key points, you know, when there are either some kind of connections with Iran is being made or something. So it's amazing when these kind of shows start showing up, and they always pick up on the same thing, and we just can't leave. You know, these things are actually quite important. We can't underestimate the agenda of curators, the marketplace, the artists themselves, you know, in order to gain platform, what do they pick up on? And in a way, what we see is a reflection of our time, of our thinking, of what we're actually dealing with. today. So I think I'm really looking forward to seeing more of you, more of me, so we can actually throw a lot of research into this and a lot more discussions. And I think we need to give room to our audience really to get some more questions in, please.
Yes. We have a question from Pauline de
Yes,
Souza.
I'm going to interrupt the conversation because I've been waiting to actually interrupt.
I'm glad you didn't interrupt me, Pauline.
It has been really interesting to hear both of you talk and have that dialogue. I do have a couple of concerns though. My first question, I said, what I'm hearing is very much a Western European perspective about the bell and Iranian feminism, but I'm not hearing how countries like New Zealand, Australia, Thailand, etc., deal with notions about Iranian artists of the bell and beyond the bell. I'm not hearing any conversations about sexuality in relation to the women and the bell at all. The assumption is that they're all heterosexual in some way, which I find kind of problematic.
But don't find that problematic because, and I tell you why, Pauline, what you're actually hearing today is one of the very first conversations between Iranian women. And I think this is just the start of the conversation. I think there are many more conversations that need to happen. So I think you don't need to be, I mean, so what do people think in Australia and New Zealand? Well, all I can say is we are still talking about societies where you're still looking at a Eurocentric contemporary art reading. So if you actually ask me a question about what it might be, how it might be read in Malaysia, for example, it would be really interesting to me because I think there needs to be a conversation between artists who practice this or see themselves within these kinds of different cultures, and then they discuss these issues, but also discuss that within other feminist kind of environments as well. So yes, we can talk about gender, but this is our first conversation, and I think is a good place to start, I think. Although I kind of disagree with a lot of the work I've seen in this session. I also realized when I researched these artists that their work is really quite extensive. So it doesn't actually talk only about heterosexuality, Pauline. The artists themselves actually work in lots of other areas. We just happen to be thinking about this particular symbol at the moment in this very limited discussion. Let's put it this way. So I hope that kind of tackles at least part of your question, Pauline.
Yes, and also if I can also interject in terms of how it's perceived, we're not really discussing how it's perceived like here in the UK or how it's perceived in the West. So that's why, and also anyway, even if we can't be everywhere at the same time and like ascertain like Thailand and New Zealand and everywhere. But it's from my point of view, it wasn't about how it was perceived here, but it was really about, in a way, translating what the artists were trying to say in those works, and to sort of like make it more understandable to any audience, to anyone, whether they're in Thailand or the UK, and how it would basically be perceived and how it should be. Because I read that like every day, I read what they had written in the Saatchi Gallery, and the interpretation was just so wrong on so many levels, and they had obviously whoever had written it was not Iranian, because they were using the words and the imagery which was all completely wrong. So it was more about like making it a bit more approachable to anyone. It doesn't matter where. So we definitely wasn't talking about the UK anyway, or the West as such.
I actually think that most of the conversation, I'm sorry to say, I think most of the conversations that I think Pauline has picked up something very important, and I think she's quite right. We, in a sense, most of these artists, from my perspective, are looking at the Western context. They are having a conversation with a Western audience, and I think we need to change our conversations.
Mm.
And there is a lot more. So what I was saying to Pauline is that I get what she's saying, but this is just a start for our conversations. But I do think there is a huge problem that artists from the Muslim world, from the Muslim diaspora, are often discussing or mitigating or kind of discussing their own kind of identity, to either presenting to the Western audience or having a conversation with a Western audience. We need to change those dialogues. We need to be having more discussions between ourselves and in other countries, you know, who also practice that, who also may have a problem, may not have a problem, may not want to express themselves in that way. So how women actually, what are women's strategies? I actually think Iranian women filmmakers are possibly some of the most advanced in this area.
Oh, they are. They're amazing Iranian films.
Not necessarily the visual artists. I think visual arts and photography is kind of a bit limited because you've got a frozen image to work with. And that's kind of quite, so the construct limits the artist, whereas in a film and a time-based work, you actually have a chance to discuss something which is more complex. And I think if you are bringing stories from one place to another, then you do need to engage with that complexity.
Yeah.
And I actually don't think frozen images, or at least what I've seen most of the time, have the capability to do that.
They do a lot of video installation. There's some paint. There is quite a lot of different. It's. I don't think they just do photography, but
I'm not
photography is an easier. Yeah.
I'm not picking at the artist, but I'm talking about the limits of what a frozen moment can actually do, and as an artist, for myself. So yeah. Simina, will be taking more.
We have a few more questions. I guess this you already tackled, but perhaps if you want to add, there's a question from Sandra Lewison. Thanks, Maria, for your thoughts regarding the over-representation of the veil. How do we change the narrative? Is it the responsibility of artist curators to show a different angle? For example, I'm very familiar with Sohaila Sokanbari's work that explores Iran's pop culture and her use of crude oil in her paintings. We need to see more of this angle, I believe. You've already touched on it, but
I think so. I mean, I think there is a lot to cover. I think I've dedicated the past 10 years of my research just on that. So it's been the longest project I've had in exploring what are the visual strategies that women artists can use in order to engage with the ethics and of aesthetic in their work when it kind of shifts from one context to another. So I think it is the responsibility of the artist. It is also the responsibility of the audience to engage properly. And we really need to, as artists, we need to demand from the art market, from the curators, that they become a little bit more proactive and not just go for simple things that kind of is more saleable. So I think, yes, it is all our responsibilities. It's a dialogue between the artwork, the artist, and the viewers, and everyone else who shows it, everyone else who gives it platform. So platform is very important. We need to change people's minds, really, And it falls upon all of us to do that, all of us.
Katy, would you like to add anything? Otherwise, we have a question from Roya.
Yes, go ahead. No, it's fine. Yes.
Roya, would you like to unmute?
Yeah, sorry, this is not Roya. It's Alexi. I have a question. If Katy, could you go back to the image of the advertisements with the pearl and the cars?
Oh yeah.
Could you present that to?
Yes.
I find that interesting because that's you know, we've talked a lot about the colonial perspective and the Western perspective, but these advertisements are coming from, in this case, the regime.
Yes.
In
ones
Iran.
Yes.
Because that's sort of official propaganda, if you will, and I guess if you could speak to sort of the response.
Yeah. So this one is
the one with the automobile. Yes, yes.
Yeah, this is the hands with BBC and all of that, trying to get a veil off. This is the automobile, the car which says, I don't understand a man who covers his car, but will not cover his, so will cover his car not to get scratches on it, but will not cover his wife and his daughter. So that's that one. This one is, you know, as you can see, this is an ugly woman with a little brain, and this is the veiled woman with a big brain. This is a woman going to heaven. This is the woman without any veil, is like this sort of candy with all these, attracting all these flies. This is the veiled woman with the candy, you know, she's sort of like protected. This is the woman as a veil. And this one of my favorite, is sort of is given sort of ratings, like energy ratings and stuff, you know. So the woman with this kind of black chador is energy rating A. So it's full masculine. Yeah. So this is the propaganda of that. And this is basically what I was talking, is that I think that they respond to that. Yes.
So I guess my ultimate question is like, is it the West's fault that we focus so much on the veil? I mean,
Yes.
is it really, is this something that's incumbent upon us? Because this is coming from, and this is not, you know, the veiled women of Iran who volunteered to put this up. I mean, this is in a male-dominated society. This is what they are disseminating and paying for, and it's, in this case, you know, a man had to approve this message, and so. As a Western art curator, is this our fault?
Well, this is actually not art. This is just the propaganda of the regime, this that I'm showing. But then some of the artists then respond to this, because as a woman, if you go in the street and you see that you're being, you know, treated like an appliance or treated like a rotting candy, or this is, I find it very offensive. And you've got to sort of like understand that, you know, women in Iran, they're going out in the streets and they're seeing this. So to not respond in a way would I think be inhuman, and you know, to then say, oh, but why are you using this signifier? Because you know, it's boring, or it's, so I think that this is why I was showing a lot of this, is to, I want to, you know, people to understand where these artists are also coming from, especially the ones living in Iran. They are really responding to this kind of thing a lot of times.
So as consumers of this art, when should we move away from the veil as a symbol? Because clearly, I mean, this hasn't gone away from their perspective.
No, I think the artists are not. The artists are not really using this that much anymore. They're not using the veil because they've moved on to other things which are more depressing and more sort of difficult. So I think this was at the very beginning when a lot of the artists started. So they used a lot of this veil iconography, but then with the situation with the veiling, then sort of like the restrictions didn't, you know, they eased down. So they moved away and they moved on to sort of other subjects and other issues as well.
I think this is why I was saying, Katy, that the reason I was talking about why it's important to discuss what is being what is being out there, or the slides you're showing, and not mixing the time, is because what other people will pick up from it. But also another thing that I'm kind of observing is, or kind of thinking about, is we as artists or curators or researchers, you cannot, or we cannot, or I feel I cannot really respond to a cliche with a cliche, because we're only then centralizing the same cliche. And I think this is the main thing that I'm saying, that as a curator myself, I often think about that, because when I'm curating stuff, I always think that they expect me to curate Iranian women and very particular image of an Iranian woman. As a matter of fact, I've kind of went away from that and looked at my curatorial practice as something much more expansive. I'm working with lots of other women so an intersectional kind of feminism that we can work with. We can work with people, women who come from all sorts of different disciplines. So I think this is quite important. Yeah. So as a curator, that would be my answer to Roya or whoever.
Alexi.
Yes. Okay. Any other questions, Amina?
Yeah, we have another question from Joyce Treasure. Is it too much to expect the artist to contain or spoon feed the audience in terms of their context? If, as an artist, you are driven by a particular experience, then is it fair to expect the artist to censor themselves to fit into work that is for the audience, rather than the experience that has driven the work or practice?
I would categorically say that one should not. I mean, who are we to judge and say what should an artist do or not? And I think, you know, if it is the artist's lived experience, whether it is the veil or whether it's not the veil, or whether it's abstraction or whether it's sort of a very personal art, I think it's not for us to, you know, say yay or nay. It's, again, it's a matter of autonomy. And I think a lot of these artists portray their own personal truth, and, you know, it's whether you relate to that on a personal level or not. And I think to a large extent that's art. You know, you like the art that you like because it somehow speaks to you or says something to you. That's my opinion anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you make your own work, and you talk about your own experience. Having said that, we are in a context where there's a lot of images around. As far as I'm concerned, as an artist, I think I would very much want to. I want some kind of, when I show my work, the very first thing you do, you are showing the work to an audience. So not to kind of to deny that, to say that, you know, there is no sense of relationship between the artist, their artwork, and the audience, kind of, for me, is kind of unreal, because I think there is always a relationship between these three. So I think my answer to, not to Katy, but to the question would be, it is about how we communicate as artists. And that's why some artists that's why my project has taken 8 years for me to unravel. And this is as responsible as I see myself towards ethics of aesthetics, which belong to particular cultures, and what it means, and how it can kind of translate at times. So I think there is a sense of responsibility for all of us in terms of how we represent. And so that's it, yeah. but at the same time, I can only talk about my own experience. I can't represent the whole of Iranian women at all. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense to whoever asked the question. Samina, you there?
Maria, we have we have a question that both Maria K and Raksha Patel posed. If you can suggest any female Iranian filmmakers that you like or that you would suggest.
Yeah.
Well, Katy, do you want to go first?
No, you go ahead. I mean, there's Makhmalbaf, there's quite a lot of them.
Well, there is Samira Makhmalbaf. Then
there's Samira Makhmalbaf.
You've got Maidan Satrapi, who
does more like, yeah.
She's great, but I will tell you loads of them. And it's Tahmine Milani, who is absolutely brilliant. She did The Fifth Reaction. She did Two Women. She did The Hidden Half. And she is a kind of figure who really discussed the Iranian social issues extremely well. I mean, I absolutely love her work. And I think one of the contemporary filmmakers you are looking at, Anna Lily Amirpour, who did A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night in 2014. She's absolutely superb. I think she goes a long way to contribute to intersectional feminism all across. I mean, this is like she has absolutely broken all the boundaries, not only visually, but also in terms of her storytelling, in the way she uses fiction, in the way she uses horror genre, in the way she uses sound. It's superb. I mean, I write about her extensively. So my apologies if I'm really passionate about her, but I would definitely be recommending her. There is Samira Makhmalbaf, who did The Apple, 1998.
Bani Panah.
Blackboard, Rakhshande Bani Etemad as well, who did Gilane. Forough Farrokhzad, who did The House is Black, and she's one of the very first women who produced a really amazing film. So I hope that's enough to start with.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. And I guess time for maybe a final question. We have a question here from Lily Almog. Is any of the work that we have seen is collected and shown in Iran?
Yes. They were not actually, were they shown in Iran? She couldn't show, I'm just trying to remember. Actually, these ones, I don't think any of them were shown in Iran. I think perhaps Shadi Qadirian was because she's there. The rest are not there. So I know Parastu Furuhar tried to show her blind spot. She couldn't. She was not allowed. Then a lot of the other ones are not in Iran. So
the ones that I've introduced, like Shahzadeh Salehipur, Mihmas Adi, these are people who are in Iran whose work is exhibited, sold, and they work in Iran. Yeah, so
but it's not political art. Their art is more sort of like yes. So there is, of course, there's a lot of artists who exhibit and sell, but a lot of political art is more difficult to sell. Rabe Bakhshani, she does sell in Iran, although again, a lot of them I think have more of a art market outside of Iran.
In Western countries.
Well, it's not just that. It's also, from what I've spoken to the artists who are there, that it's also the difficulty of exhibiting there, and a lot of corruption in the art galleries. So there is a lot of that as well, from what I've gathered.
Yes.
It's sort of like they're caught between a rock and a hard place. You know, it's sort of like the West is, you know, it's difficult to exhibit here. This is, of course, if you're living in Iran. Those who don't live in Iran, a lot of the artists who don't live in Iran, they exhibit, you know, people like Parsu Furuhar comes and goes, but some of them don't go back. A lot of these artists do not go back. Shirin Neshat doesn't go back. I know that Halin Yazman doesn't go back. I know a lot of them, they don't go back to Iran, so they don't show there.
Yeah,
Or they can't.
yeah. It's kind of there are. I have to tell you, and I go to Iran, and I see some exhibition. There is a really, I would say, Iranian women, from my perspective, have blossomed since
Absolutely.
the revolution.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
it has been absolutely extraordinary in terms of music, in terms of film, in terms of making artworks. And there is so much to be said, so much to be explored. And I think there are exhibitions, there's a really bubbly kind of scene in it, not so much now because of the coronavirus. So, you know, these things.
And sanctions, let's not forget the sanctions.
Absolutely right. The sanctions, which is really is really sad to see that, but is actually impacts all the artists as well. So there is a lot to be discussed, and I really thank Katy for her presentation, because it actually opened up a whole kind of lot of issues that we need to discuss more. We need to have like series of discussions to explore more. But yes, thank you, Katy. I really
thank you, Maria, for responding and for all your points.
Thank you.
And thank you, Samina.
Samina, thank you very much. And thank you for all the audience who asked the questions and also contributed to this. I mean, absolutely. I think that's really important. So yeah, thank you all of you who attended this talk, and yeah, hopefully there'll be more.
Yeah, there'll be more on other symbols and other issues.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you so much for this presentation. I think it really, just by seeing the chat and all the questions that were coming through, it's really clear that we need to have more of these conversations. And I'm sorry we couldn't go through all the questions, and I could see there was a conversation happening in parallel in the chat as well.
Fantastic, because I'm just seeing Sohaila's iPad. Stereotyping and ghettoizing themselves is absolutely true. So what she's talking about is about self-orientalizing and self-othering, which is an issue which needs to be expanded upon, talked about extensively, and not only within Iranian artists arena, but within women's art everywhere. It's really important for us to really discuss that.
Yes.
So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Katy and Maria, and everybody who attended. And yeah, if you have time to fill in this survey, that would be really helpful for us. But thank you all for joining tonight, and hope to see you again at some other Research Network events. Thank you.
Thank you, Samina. Thank you.
Thanks, Katy. Bye, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Samina.